Hey everyone, this is Jennifer Beamer, owner-operator of ExpertlyDyed Art by Science, and this is the daily vlog, episode number 60. Welcome to 2023, and today we're going to be talking about my Tour de Fleece weaving project. Now, if you watched my Tour de Fleece videos, one of the first things that I wanted to do was spin some mulberry silk, and I wanted to do it over the fold. That's what I did, and I didn't have a whole lot. I think I had in total somewhere around 120 yards, and it was a 3-ply, and it was sort of like a heavy lace weight type yarn, and I wanted to do a project with the handspun during Tour de Fleece and film that, and also film and edit and upload a video every single day, and also have my mom here visiting for 3 weeks and graduate with my doctorate. And yeah, you can see how I'm only just now finishing this project. The other thing was, because I used very fine yarns for it, it took a while. So in some of the early snippets of video that I recorded, I basically had to switch up the way that I was weaving it a couple of times. So the first thing that I did was I got the first established rows done, and then I realized after about 2 or 3 inches of weaving that I didn't like how dense it was becoming. And so I think I've got a 10 dent reed on my Kromsky loom, I think. I'll have to double check. But it's really great for thicker yarns, not so great for thinner yarns. And if you use thinner yarns, you're going to make a gauzy fabric because there's more space between. And I wanted them to be roughly balanced, so in order to make those nice square-shaped spaces in between the warp and the weft, I had to be very careful with how much I packed the weft down, because if you pack it down too much, it suddenly becomes a weft face fabric instead of a balanced fabric. So it was going to be gauzy no matter what, and that was sort of the intention, to make something that was very lightweight, something that I could wear during the summer, because yes, in the UK, sometimes it doesn't get above like 65 degrees on a day. So I wanted something that wasn't as heavy that I would wear during the winter, but I still need something lighter for this sort of spring, early fall, and sometimes during the summer here. And this was a really great way to do that, is because it was still going to be breathable, so if I did get a little bit warm, it wouldn't be cloying around my neck. And I also wanted to update my, woven wardrobe. So this was the project I went with. And to add some extra challenges, I wanted to use handspun that I had used in a previous project. In fact, the flyaway cardi that I showed at the 2022 Crafting New Year's Resolutions video. And so I used the leftovers from that project in this one, and I dyed some, it was 100% alpaca. I think it was the lace weight, and I must have dyed it with Easter egg dye, or maybe food coloring, back in 2015. And because I remember I oven dyed it. It just sat in my stash for years, and obviously it went from the US to the UK with me. So I was thinking, what can I do with all of these yarns? And because I feel like I'm a glutton for punishment, I decided to put it all together into the same project. Essentially, when I came up with this project plan, it was to use the Tour de Fleece yarns sort of as I was making them, so that they wouldn't just sit waiting for a project for months, or in my case, sometimes years. So rather than think about all the potential things that I can do with it and that I should just store it away until I get really, really inspired, was to just jump in, assemble something together, and see what the result was. And so I had all of these yarns They were all different gauges, all different tensile strengths, and for my loom setup, not ideal. So as I said, I started off doing this where you switch the huddle up or down, and then you put your weft in, and then you put it into neutral and beat it down. I did that for a short while and realized that actually these yarns are way too delicate for that beating method. So then I had to switch to something that I hate doing because it's very time consuming, but it's the best method, which is to switch it from the up to the full down position after you've put the weft in, put in a beating stick, put it back into neutral, and then use the beating stick to gently coax it down, the weft down into place. So what it essentially becomes is a 3-step process, because if I'm in the up position, I put my weft in, I put it into the down position, put the beating stick in, and then I have to put it back up to neutral to then beat it down, and then I have to put it back into the down position to put the next weft through. And so I did this for the duration of the project, and it was very time consuming, but it was a way to make sure that I didn't break any of my warps. So I didn't have any broken warps during this process. So if you're working with anything that's really, really delicate, or maybe you have a suboptimal setup with your loom, definitely go slower. You will be rewarded for it, I promise. The second thing was, as I mentioned previously, the tensile strength of these yarns. So I had 100% silk, the mulberry silk. I had 100% alpaca, and then I had a 90% or 95% wool. So there was a little bit of, I think, yak and bamboo and some angelina, and I think there was some sari silk blended into the wool, but it was in very small quantities because I didn't want it to be like way out there, so it's mostly wool. And so I had something that was really inelastic, the silk, something that was mostly inelastic, the alpaca, and something that was really elastic, which was my superfine merino wool. And during the weaving process, you know, this was obviously going to be a challenge. So knowing that they had different tensile strengths, one of the things that I did in terms of design was place my silk warps pretty, well, symmetrically, but also pretty often throughout the warps, so that they were my tension guide, and it was as even as I could possibly make it. So what I mean is, I didn't just put silk on either end, and I didn't just put silk on either end and then, you know, some silk warps in the middle. I sort of spaced them out into groups of like 2 or 4, and so I had them spread out so that there wasn't a large gap between where I had silk warps and non-silk warps. So that way it would still have really good structural integrity as I wove and in the finished piece, because once you remove the tension from weaving, because wool has a higher amount of elasticity, you can actually stretch that more, and it's actually going to spring back more. So I didn't want to have these large sections of my weaving where the wool had sort of like pulled the fabric a bit more, and it made the surrounding silk and the alpaca to a certain extent be really, really limp. So I wanted to make those areas much smaller. And so by thinking about the tensile strength of the yarns I was working with, I thought this was a really great compromise to get sort of this almost like buckled warp and weft effect without it sort of interfering with the integrity of it being a scarf. And so that was really the first thing that I thought was really important for this. And then during the actual weaving of the weft, I did use some of the silk, which I had very precious little at this point, and I think I must have run out of the silk 3-ply, because I ended up using some 2-ply at one point. Although I won't be able to find it right now, of course. But I do remember thinking I needed to place the silk within the weft, but at much greater intervals. That way I could ensure that I used the silk throughout it rather than just all in one spot. So I mainly used the wool and the alpaca, and I tried to do them in random color blocks. So I wasn't counting the number of picks I was doing for each color, and I wasn't keeping track of any other pattern. So it's totally random, and it's pretty much just like what I did for my many breed scarf, which was a daily vlog from a little while ago. And so the final result has these blocks of sort of like a bright sunny yellow, which is the alpaca, and then I've got these patches of, it's kind of like a pistachio green. And then the silk that I used, it's sort of, if you were to add shine to that pistachio green and lighten it a little bit, and it's sort of like a champagne yellow. It's not quite deep in any way, it's very pastel in shade. And the end result looks really great also because you've got this incredible shine from the silk, and then you have almost none in the merino except for when you see a little bit of the bamboo that I put in there. And the alpaca is probably moderately shiny. It doesn't really look shiny except for when you have a light source sort of shining on it. But here's the result, and I'm very excited to show you how it turned out. And so it's not like super long or anything. So this is it folded up in half. But I didn't want it to be really big, mainly because I wanted it to be small so that I could stow it away very conveniently if I got too warm. And it's just enough so I could wrap it around my neck. And so, I'll demonstrate. Yeah. So something kind of like that. Almost like how a necklace is an accessory. That's how I sort of viewed this scarf. So it's very light. I opted actually for a shorter fringe. Those of you who have watched some of my other videos, I really love fringe that's about twice this length. I must have been born in the 70s in my brain because I would have loved all of the garments with just fringe, long fringe everywhere, fringe everywhere. But yeah, so I think, come a little closer. I think it looks pretty good. It has a really nice drape. I don't know if the video camera will pick up on it, but it's got a really nice amount of sheen from the silk. Yeah. So I don't know. So I don't really know how well it's going to pick up the shine from the silk, but the silk is in these strips here, and because the alpaca doesn't have a lot of elasticity, it's going to sort of behave similarly to the silk. So this little patch of green here, right, this little bit of green, that's the wool. And so there's just ever so slightly a small amount of puckering. You can really see it on this alpaca line right here. So this is that yellow alpaca, and you can see how it hasn't really responded back from not being under tension. So it's kind of got like this buckled surface. So the alpaca has this buckled surface, kind of similar to the silk, that the wool just doesn't have. So the intersections where there's the wool, that looks like a balanced weave. Where there's the silk or the alpaca, it's kind of wobbly or wiggly, and the reason is it was held under tension. the wool has sort of contracted back to its original state of being. So it was stretched, now it's relaxed. And so it's kind of pulling at the alpaca and the silk, so it kind of forms these little ripples. And you can kind of see, if I move the fabric in the shadows, that's basically where the ripples are congregating. So that's the result of the wool being snapped back into shape after being held under tension, and the other fibers just being loose as a result. And so this rouging actually, I think it enhances some of the elements I was going for, which was a light gauzy fabric in a color that I don't often wear because it's really similar to my skin tone. So usually you want to stray a little bit away from something that looks too similar to your skin tone, which is why I tend to wear darker colors when I can than lighter ones, and ones that have more blues if they are lighter than greens or yellows, because again, it's really close to my skin color. But it has sort of a couple of different types of texture, and one of them was the play with the tensile strength to kind of create this slight buckling or rouging of the fabric so that it just didn't look like plain weave. A cat just emerged from under the couch. So yeah, I think the end result was excellent. I would definitely do this again. Now that I have a loom stand, it will be a heck of a lot easier. So imagine having to do this very arduous process, either sitting on the bed, which is softer, but you're still kind of cross-legged, leaning over, or on the floor, which is the other thing that I had to do when I was working on it. So I got my loom stand on Christmas Eve, and I literally was able to finish this in no time because I was sitting comfortably. I was actually talking to my mom on the phone while I was weaving, finishing this weaving. And then in terms of the finishing, I know there's lots of different ways to finish, but I like just doing a knotted fringe. So that's all I did to finish it, was just make the knotting at the bottom. And you can kind of see here, this is where I started. The fabric is slightly more dense at this end, but honestly you're really not going to be able to tell, especially when I'm wearing it. And so I'm not at all bothered with this end being slightly more dense, but you can kind of see this is more weft faced because the warps kind of disappear inside. So because this was packed more densely in this region, this isn't balanced, it's weft faced. It's fine, but I liked having those more square shaped holes, like you can see here. They're more square shaped. You can actually really see the buckling. So that's the silk and the alpaca. And so the wool is that little strip there in the middle. And you can see how it's gone back into shape after being stretched, whereas the others haven't. So if you're going to be doing a project where you're using different tensile strengths in the warp, my two recommendations are space that as often as you can, where that you don't have huge sections where the inelastic warp is spread out too much, with no bit in between those 2 points, because it's going to make that buckling look really saggy, and I don't know how that would look. I don't think it would look as nice. It might look fine, and it might be something you're going for, but just bear in mind that if you space out your inelastic warp more than what I did, it will be saggier in those spots in between. And then the second thing is use those inelastic yarns to dictate how much tension that you're going to apply to stretching out your warps. So for me, that basically meant I had to regularly advance the warp, but not by a whole lot. So I only would advance it maybe 2 inches at a time. And that was in part also to make sure that it stayed in that sweet spot where the weaving felt really comfortable and it was far enough away from the heddle so that I could have working space, and the fell of the cloth was nearer to the front beam as well. But because those yarns are inelastic, as you have a weft going, you know, up and over your warps, it's actually going to apply some tension to the warps. And so with something like wool or any kind of same tensile strength warps you're using, you're not necessarily going to notice major disparities unless you have something like silk and wool in your warps. You'll very much notice how the wefts going up and over have pulled on the silk to the point where it's just like a tight cord. And so you have to relieve some of that tension, first of all, so that you can even make your piece of fabric so it's part functional, but also I start to worry about the strain and stress of stretching those yarns, because they can still snap, especially if they're really, really fine. So advance your warp regularly so that you can relieve some of that tension and to give you some more working tension ease as you're going. But other than that, you know, if you've had a similar thought, by all means, it's a brand new year, go ahead and get all your yarns out, set up your loom, and if it means you have to work slowly, that's okay, because eventually you'll finish. if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I also have my website, ExpertlyDyed.com, and also the same on Etsy. So if you would like to support me and purchase some of my products, you can go there, take a look to see what I have in stock. I also have a Patreon, so if you want to support me in small amounts on a regular basis, I always post content there first, some behind the scenes stuff, and all videos that I produce go live there as well without any ads, so you get sort of like the first view of the content. And I also have various social media accounts like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, which you can find in the description below. Other than that, I appreciate you watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.